Hello, everyone. Good morning. It's Miss Kelso. Sorry that we were not able to have class. BBC just doesn't want to work this morning. So things happen, life happens, we make do. So I did want to go through what we're going to do today. I'm just going to do it as a recording instead of a live lesson. So it's going to be longer than normal recordings, but that's just because it was what we were supposed to do in class. So and I don't get the fun interaction with you guys, but we'll do the best we can. So today, our goals for today was to learn about myths. We're specifically focusing right now on mythology, or the myth section of our mythology and folklore class. We're going to add the definition of myths to your field notes, which we haven't done yet. I do have the field notes now. They're in the class. I'm also going to attach them to the email that I send out with this recording. The field notes are going to be something that you're going to keep track of every time we go over information. It's just a way to kind of keep track of everything in one place. So you have it. That'll help you when you go to review for the final exam in here, as well as things along the way. So I will attach that to this recording, or to the email with this recording, and you will fill that out as we go. Okay, so today we're going to be filling out the section about myths, and I'm going to go over what you're going to fill out there. And then we're going to read Arachne, the spinner, which is a Greek myth. So, okay, what are myths? That is the question we're going to explore. So what do myths do? They do several different things, and it depends. Some myths do some of these things, some do all of them. But the things that a myth can do, it can help explore natural phenomenon. So why does, what is lightning? Well, according to the Norse myths, lightning is, Thor, the god of thunder, is, throwing down lightning. Why do we have eclipses? Why do we have tornadoes? All of those things. Why does the sun rise in the morning, set in the evening? Um, before we had scientific explanations, we had, people would create myths to explain why these things were happening. Another thing is that myths express the deepest fears and hopes of the human race. And we kind of talked about that a little bit. The whole hero's journey is kind of a pathway for how to live life for anybody. And the same thing with myths in general is they kind of deal with those deep fears and hopes that we, throughout time struggle with. And that is part of why mythology stands the test of time. So even though you may not necessarily believe in Greek mythology and think that Zeus is up on Mount Olympus running things, it still teaches you things about what our fears are, what our dreams are, and how to live as human beings in this world, right? So, and kind of like dreams, you know how dreams kind of have symbolic meaning? It may not make a lot of sense if you think about it too logically, but symbolically it makes sense. The same thing with a lot of myths. They make sense on a symbolic level, even if they don't necessarily make sense on a logical level. Myths also teach a moral lesson. A lot of them have a message to teach. So you can see, and again, the moral lesson helps you to learn how to deal with your fears and, reach your hopes. It's about living life and how to live to the best life. And that's what myths are really about. It can also explain customs, the institutions, or the history of the people who created it. So with myths, there's always a couple different things you want to look at. And this is actually true with mythology. It's true with any literature, anything that you, any books, anything that you read or watch, movies, etc. They speak on two levels. And what makes something a classic, what makes it stick around, so what makes us want to study myths now, is that it does express the deep fears and hopes of the human race. It expresses things on a universal level that every human at every time period deals with, or a lot of humans deal with at various time periods. It expresses that, but it also talks on another level. It shows the custom of the people who created it. So again, Greek mythology shows about what the Greek life was like. So we can learn a lot about their customs and history through the mythology. But on another level, on a deeper level, it still speaks to us as humans today, even though we, aren't the same cultures and customs. So keep that in mind whenever you are studying mythology, folklore, fairy tales, or just in literature from any time period. that it has those two levels. And I think that's really important to realize this. On one level, it teaches you about that time period. On another level, it teaches you about human life in general, and it speaks to a universal theme. And that's why things like myths stick around. The other thing that myths can do is explain one of life's mysteries. So there's the national phenomenon, there's our fears, our dreams, there's moral lessons we learn. There's also just life mysteries, how do things work, right? And that is why myths last, because they talk to us on the top, one level they teach us about the past and about people who lived in the past, but on a deeper level it teaches us about human life in general. So on your field notes, you're going to want to write down each of these things. What do myths do? They explain natural phenomenon. They express our deepest fears and hopes. They teach a moral lesson. They explain the customs of the people who created it. And they explain life's mysteries. Okay, what do myths often include? Now, not always, but a lot of myths include some or all of these things. So the first is often people with superhuman powers. You might have gods, demigods, which are kind of in between gods, or just people in general that have superhero powers, right? So kind of, any superhero story is kind of like a myth, right? It's got that superhero characteristic. Not all myths do, but a lot of them do. It may include talking animals. Again, not all of them, but some. Native American myths have a lot with, like the trickster gods, which are often seen as animals who can change form and become humans sometimes. So you may see talking animals. You may see demigods or other deities who interfere with human affairs. So gods, demigods, deities of some kind are getting involved with human life and how that goes. So a lot of times myths include those. Keep in mind, myths are ancient and they were passed down orally. That means they were not written down at first. Myths tend to have existed long before we had the written word. So a storyteller would tell it to people would pass it on. A mother would tell it to her kids or father, or the wise person of the village, whatever. They would pass the stories down by telling them. And if you've ever played the game of telephone, I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but you sit in a circle and you whisper something and goes around the circle, and by the time it gets to the end, things are different from when it started. Same thing with myths. Because they were passed down orally, everyone who says it sometimes changes things a little. So that is part of why you can't say, okay, this is the myth that has to do with, Zeus. This is what he did. A lot of times you'll be like, oh, Zeus did this. No, wait, no, it was this. No, he did that. Well, maybe kind of, there's a lot of different variations because it wasn't written down and set in stone or set on paper, so to speak. Because it was passed down, things changed over time. So there's lots of various stories that may or may not agree with each other because of the nature of how myths were told. Okay, so that's kind of the basics of myths. Again, those things you should make sure you write that down in your field notes. And we'll kind of review that again tomorrow, but just wanted to go over that. Now we're going to start today with a Greek myth called Arachne the Spinner. And I was going to have volunteers read it, but of course, since this is just a recording and you guys aren't here, I'm going to have to read it to you. So yeah, I can't have you guys raise your hand to volunteer. You're just going to have to listen to my voice. So, Arachne the Spinner. A long time ago, in a place called Lydia, lived a young spinner and weaver called Arachne. Lydia had a reputation for producing splendid textiles and had some of the finest spinners and weavers in the world. No spinner or weaver was more talented or gifted than Arachne. Wow, what beautiful work! Gasped. Okay, so she is the best spinner and weaver around, right? Arachne wove all sorts of beautiful pictures into her cloth. Often the scenes were so lifelike that people felt they could almost touch and feel what was going on. Visitors traveled many miles to see her beautiful work. Not only were her finished products beautiful to look at, but just watching her weave was a sight to behold. Even the nymphs of the forest would stop their play and look on in wonder. Arachne was rightly very proud of her work, but she was also very arrogant. So remarkable were her works that observers often commented that she must have been trained by Athena, the goddess of wisdom and crafts, also known for her ability to spin and weave beautiful pictures. Arachne was scornful of this. Why, she said, should she, with all her talent, be placed as an inferior place to the goddess? She would tell visitors that the goddess herself could not produce work any better. So, boast, boast, boast. I am better than anyone, even better than the gods and the goddesses. Now, if you know anything about Greek mythology, or in general, she's going to have trouble because you don't say you're better than the gods or the goddesses. Just in general, it's not a good thing. When news of Arachne's bold claim reached Athena, she was very angry, but she decided to give the young woman a chance to redeem herself. So one day she disguised herself as an old peasant woman and went to visit Arachne. She gently warned her to be careful not to offend the gods by comparing her talents to those of an immortal. Warning, do not offend the gods. But Arachne told the young woman to save her breath. She boasted that she would welcome a contest with Athena, and if she lost, would suffer whatever punishment the goddess decided. Uh-oh. At this, Athena revealed her true form. Oh, that's me. The visitor who had come to watch Arachne weaving were very afraid, but Arachne stood her ground. She had made a claim, and she would prove it. Transformation to Athena. It was decided they would compete by each creating a tapestry. So they would weave together beautiful cloth that would show a picture, right? The two of them set up their looms in the same room, and the contest began. The mortal Arachne at her loom, and the goddess Athena at hers. They wove from early in the morning until it got too dark to see. The next day they compared what they had done. Spin, spin, weave, weave. Okay, what do you think's gonna happen? Athena had woven a stunning cloth, showing the gods and goddesses together on Mount Olympus, doing good deeds for people. A beautiful scene was developed in the threads. Those witnessing the competition marveled at the work produced by the goddess. Arachne, however, had woven a cloth that made fun of the gods and goddesses. Uh-oh. It showed them getting drunk and behaving very badly. Nevertheless, so exquisite was the mortal's work that the characters in the scenes were lifelike. So it probably looked better than these pictures here. When Athena saw it, she was even angrier than she was before. She was forced to admit that Arachne's work was flawless, but the disrespectful choice of subject made her finally lose her temper. She's turning red in anger. Athena destroyed Arachne's tapestry and loom. Then she touched her forehead, making sure that she felt guilt for her actions. Arachne was ashamed, but the guilt was so overwhelming it was far too deep for a mortal to bear. Realizing her folly, Arachne was crushed with shame. Terrified and in turmoil, she ran into a nearby wood and hanged herself from a tree. Oh, that's sad. Athena had not expected Arachne to take her own life and took pity on her. Sprinkling Arachne with the juices of an aconite plant, Athena loosened the rope, which became a cobweb, then said gently, "Spin, if you wish to spin." At this, Arachne slowly came back to life, but not in human form. For as Athena spoke her words, Arachne's nose and ears disappeared. Her arms and legs became long and slender, and new legs grew beside them. Then her whole body shrank until she was just a tiny little spider. For the rest of her life, Arachne was to hang from a thread and to be a great weaver, and the descendants of Arachne still weave their magic webs all over the earth today. So there is our story of Arachne the spinner who becomes Arachne the spider, right? So what characteristics of a myth does this story possess? It says here you can refer to your notes, and we could go over this if we had class, but since we don't, let's go back to our notes about the characteristics of myths. First of all, what they do. So let's think about this myth. Does it explain a natural phenomenon? Does it explain why spiders spin webs? Yeah, it does. So that would count, right? Um, does it express our deepest fears and hopes of the human race? Well, one of our biggest hopes and dreams, right, is to be, the best we can be at whatever we're good at. So there's definitely that in there, and the fear that we could become, that there's consequences of doing that. So I'd say yes. Does it teach a moral lesson? Well, what lesson do you think we can learn from Arachne so that we don't end up becoming spiders? Um, I think that the message there, the point is to not be arrogant, even if you're good at something. Never think you're the best. Obviously, don't say you're better than the gods and goddesses, but in general, just don't think you're better than others. Focus on doing the best you can and just be proud of your own work without thinking that you're better than everyone else, right? So there's definitely a moral lesson there too. Does it explain the history of the people who created it? Yeah, I suppose to some extent at least. It talks about, their interest in the weaving and textiles and stuff. So that gives us some insight into Greek life, right? And explaining one of life's mysteries. Well, how spiders came around, I guess that's one of life's mysteries. So kind of, yeah, I'd say. Mostly I think it's kind of the natural phenomenon and the moral lesson and kind of dealing with those fears and hopes, right? What does it include? So did it have superhuman powers? People with superhuman powers, kind of, Arachne had her talent, which was kind of above normal people, right? We didn't, well, we didn't have talking animals, although Arachne turned into an animal, so maybe she talked afterwards, we don't know. Gods, demigods, and deities interfering with human affairs, definitely, right? We had Athena coming down and saying, hey, wait a minute, who do you think you are? Let me put you in your place, right? So we definitely had that. So there is an example for you of myths and kind of how they show some of those characteristics. That is just an introduction to Greek mythology. So our learning target for today was I can explain what myths do and what they contain. So of course, if you were in class, I would ask you to use your polling tools to tell me how you feel about this. A, you feel like you got it. B, you're pretty good. C, you feel like you're starting to get it. D, still not really comfortable. And E, what is a learning target? But I'm hopefully that you guys are at least at C, that you feel like you're starting to get an idea of what myths are and what they contain. If you do have questions, of course you can't stick around for class because we don't have class, but of course, as always, message me, send me an email. I check my emails all the time. You can also always call me or you can send me a text, whatever works best for you. Let me know. Otherwise, have a great day. And I will see you guys hopefully in class tomorrow. And thank you for being understanding about this. Have a good one. Thanks.